Welcome to IVF This, episode 98, Overcoming Overwhelm. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. After 10 years of primary and secondary infertility due to both male and female factor infertility, I am now the mother to 3 beautiful miracles. I am married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you how to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. I hope you are all doing so well. We are coming off the heels of Thanksgiving in the US and the second birthday of this podcast, or would it be considered an anniversary? Anyway, we've been doing this for 2 years. I am blown away when I think about how far this podcast has been and how far it's able to reach around the world. It is such an honor that you all come and hang out with me for however long you feel like you need to. And even though we are 2 years in, we still have a lot coming down the pike, my friends. So don't you worry. I've got a lot of content even written out through the first half of 2023. I can't even fathom 2023, folks. We are just chomping at the bit to get to 2023. I also want to take a second and let you know that the next Ask Emily Anything call is on Tuesday, December 13th at 1 p.m. Central. So that's 2 p.m. Eastern or 11 a.m. Pacific. Remember, this is a free open coaching call where you can interact with me either using the Q&A option on Zoom, or you can raise your hand and I can coach you directly. Either way, it's an amazing call and I would love to talk to you. So you can get that link for the call and add it to your calendar item so you don't forget. The link is in my social media bio, or if you're on my email list, you'll get emailed the day of as a reminder. And you can get on my list by going to www.ivfthiscoaching.com and take my free mini course, 3 Steps to Managing Your IVF Anxiety. You do that, you're on the list. So let's get started. We are continuing on today with another aspect of perfectionism, which is overwhelm. Now, if you haven't listened to this episode, maybe like 2 episodes back, I think, was on perfectionism. Go do that before you start this one. You want a really good foundation of understanding what perfectionism is before you really understand what is creating or contributing to your overwhelm, which is an aspect of perfectionism. And then you can work on getting unstuck from that pattern. Now, if you have listened to the perfectionism episode, then you are aware that perfectionism is like a plague that has descended upon us. There are many roots of perfectionism, things like white supremacy, capitalism, and our own evolutionary fear of judgment and rejection. All that to say is that none of us picked up perfectionism as a belief system out of a bunch of other belief systems and thought, yeah, I would love to provide my brain with endless torture options filled with regret and judgment. No, none of us did this. But just because you didn't actively choose to participate, to practice that perfectionistic belief system, does not mean that you need to actively continue participating in that belief system. Okay? Thus, we are unpacking the elements of perfectionism over the next few episodes. All right, let's get started. Overwhelm, like any emotion, is created by our thinking. Overwhelm is not having specific things that need to get completed, having a bunch of errands to run, a pressing deliverable at work, or anything like that. When you hear me talk about the think, feel, do model or cycle, I'll refer to it interchangeably, I will often talk about a circumstance. And that's the first thing in the think, feel, do cycle, right? It's important to think about the circumstance as your opportunity to have a thought. But the circumstance is really just the math of the situation. It's completely neutral, but it's the circumstance that we often credit for our overwhelm. One quick caveat for all of my fellow neurodivergents: overstimulation can also feel a lot like overwhelm. It can produce a similar feeling to overwhelm. So you might want to be mindful of that. If you're feeling overwhelmed, but maybe you can't pinpoint something specific, that's something that we'll talk about later. You might be overstimulated and you might just need to take a few minutes, quiet, dark room, all by yourself, just to get over that overstimulation. So just a small caveat. So let's start with an example of one of the most overwhelming experiences of IVF that my clients talk to me about and I have similarly experienced. And that is when that giant box filled with medications, syringes, needles, and all of the other accessories arrive. When we open this box, probably with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, and then we start to take everything out and visualize everything. And depending on your protocol, you could have auto injector pens in there, different vials filled with powder that you then have to reconstitute, other meds, pills, things like that need to be refrigerated, some things that don't. Maybe you're doing a transfer cycle and you are injecting progesterone and oil, which is pretty much being asked to inject a bamboo shoot full of molasses into your upper ass cheek every day, or even multiple times a day. That was always my progesterone and oil experience. I don't know if yours is different. I digress. So we get this box full of meds, and all of a sudden our brain is flooded with thoughts like, this is so much stuff. How am I going to remember everything? What if I mix the wrong thing or give myself the wrong dose of something? I'm not a doctor or nurse. How can they expect me to get this right? I don't know what the hell I'm doing. What are the Q caps for again? What is the medication that I'm supposed to mix? How do I mix it? Do I have to do this every single day? I can't do this. I can't possibly think and remember and do all of these things. Where am I going to find the time to make sure I get my shots exactly when I'm supposed to do them, right? Any one of these thoughts could create a feeling of overwhelm. And that's just like a snapshot into my brain and what I went through when I was opening those boxes. You could have like very different flavors of thoughts, but it's the same thing. It's a thought that creates that feeling of overwhelm. Now, you might have heard those examples and thought, those thoughts, they make me feel anxious, not overwhelmed. Very often, anxiety and overwhelm feel very similarly. Your heart starts to beat faster, almost like you can hear it in your ears. Your head gets really full and almost feels like you're underwater. Notice that they're interchangeable. Whatever language you prefer to use is completely up to you, right? But the important thing is understanding what is actually creating the overwhelm. And it's all the thoughts that you're having. It's all the verbal thought vomit that your primitive brain is spewing because of unpacking a box of medication, syringes, pills, patches, whatever. And you've never done this before. And your brain likes to remind you that new things are scary and is probably going to kill us, right? That's just how our brains work. It's not the box of medications. Remember what I said earlier about circumstances? The circumstance is that box of medication. That box of medication and supplies gave you the opportunity to have all of those thoughts. The box doesn't create the overwhelm. It provided you the opportunity to think about all of the scary things that might happen, and that felt overwhelming. That created the feeling of overwhelm or anxiety. So what's an example outside of IVF? I'm so glad you asked. Have you ever looked at your task list or to-do list or calendar and thought, I don't have enough time? Or some variation of that thought? Yep, me too. This morning, in fact. That is a sentence, a thought that creates overwhelm. And very often we will actually will that belief to be true, or at least I do. If I find myself telling myself that I don't have enough time or that I have too many things to do, it's all based in similar thinking, then I will dawdle, avoid, procrastinate, all of the things. And then I will make it so that I do not have enough time to finish what I wanted because I pissed all my time away. So the work project or the errand, the time commitments, etc., those are the circumstances. Those are the things that give you the opportunity to have a thought. They are not the reason that you are overwhelmed. We want to be really honest with ourselves. We are the ones creating that overwhelm. There is more opportunity to feel overwhelmed in IVF because a lot of it is uncertain. A lot of it is new terrain for us, but that doesn't mean that the process is what's creating it. And that's such an important distinction. And you'll know why in just a second. For me, my overwhelm thought, like a thought that I can almost guarantee is going to produce a feeling of overwhelm, is I don't have enough time. I tell myself that multiple times a day. It's a pretty automatic thought for me. It's a pretty habitual thought for me. It's pretty ridiculous because I say it to myself when I have 30 minutes to get something accomplished, or if I have an open calendar for the day and need to get something done. Like there's no validity to that thought because it's so variable. It doesn't actually have any meaning to me. It's just something that I tell myself over and over. I give it meaning in those moments when I want to indulge in that thought and like indulge in the overwhelm. Those moments when I agree with that thought, but that's all. The thought is just a sentence that my brain decides to offer up, and sometimes I agree with it, and sometimes I remind myself that I will get done whatever I get done, and putting that kind of abstract external, internal pressure on myself will only yield me completely procrastinating, and nothing productive comes from that. I usually find that I tend to agree with that thought more often if I am already feeling anxious about something. So let's say I'm writing something and I'm not sure how it's going to sound, or I haven't really been able to make all the connections to it or together in my brain yet, and I'm feeling anxious about an impending deadline. Well, the more anxious I feel about the deadline or my work product or my understanding or knowledge around the subject matter, the more likely I am going to believe the thoughts that my brain offers up in that already anxious state. In an anxious state, you are not able to access the more rational parts of your brain. Anxiety is a very primitive emotion, and it is very powerful. The moment your brain senses danger, either external, internal, physical, psychological, whatever, it doesn't differentiate. And yes, a box full of medication that you've never taken before and regimens that you have never considered could be part of that very scary sense of danger that your brain is predicting. That feeling is so strong, and we don't want to understate it, and we don't want to gloss it over because it is very strong, but it is not rational. It's not based in logic. That part of your brain, that primitive part, is reactionary only. And that is so important to remember. So when you're looking at this box of medication and all of the mixing and diluting and injecting and schedules, and your brain tells you we're never going to figure this out, that is not a reliable or accurate statement at all. Even if you just took a quick glance of all the things that you have learned how to do, I would lay money on you previously having told yourself, I'm never going to figure this out. Hell, most of us drive cars, right? I would argue that driving a car is much higher danger stake, right? Considering all the things that could go wrong for you or someone else than IVF. And you do it multiple times a day, I would guess, right? You figured out how to do that. So that was the long way of saying that the first way to overcome overwhelm is to figure out what the thought is that you're having that is creating the overwhelm. Okay. We want to identify the thought. Once we identify the thought, then we have more to work with. And I'm going to talk about that, right? So the next step is to pick out thoughts that you can practice ahead of time that would feel better. Something believable, something that you can lean into. It doesn't have to be a shiny, happy, perfect, super optimistic thought. Oftentimes, when we start thought work and we start practicing it, we go to the other extreme, right? We try to create the opposite of that thought. So if you're telling yourself that you don't have enough time, you try to get the pendulum to swing the complete opposite direction and try and force yourself to believe something like, I have all the time in the world. Right? If it's not believable, if a thought is not believable, then it's about as useful as an ashtray on a motorcycle, right? So find the middle and believable ground. Maybe it's that this will take as long as it takes. Or I tell myself that I don't have enough time frequently, and yet everything always ends up getting done that needs to get done. Or maybe you're telling yourself that you're never going to be able to figure out all of this medication and the process and all of that, right? That you're going to mess up dosage or mix the wrong medication together. I want you to remind yourself, I'm not a flippant person. This is really important to me. This is a very thoughtful process. I know how to take my time. I know how to be attentive to the situation. And if something does happen or I have questions, I know that I can contact my doctor's office or my nurse and have that question answered. Your brain wants you to believe whenever you're going through something scary that you're all alone, like you're on an island with absolutely no support. But that is not true. You have support and you know how to access it. You are more than capable of figuring this out. Sometimes I will even remind myself, hey love, you are anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, whatever that emotion is, and you're not thinking clearly. It's okay. You're safe. And yes, I really do talk to myself like this sometimes. When we ground ourselves and feel calmer, our thinking will get clearer. And sometimes I just have to remind myself, like, now's not the time for me to try to figure this out because I'm in such a heightened state. So let me get myself grounded again, and then I can look at it. So again, if you're feeling overwhelmed, I want you to look for the thought that is creating the overwhelm. Then look at your pre-made list of your next best thoughts that you can turn to help yourself in that moment. All right. And I want to share one more extra bonus trick with you. I remember one of my clients, we were practicing this, and the thought that she came up with was, I always feel overwhelmed until I make a plan. So I just need to make a plan. And this, my friends, was genius, pure genius. The reason it's so genius is because the way our brains are designed and how they've evolved, it is very difficult for your brain to formulate and simultaneously execute a plan. It is much easier for our brain to formulate the plan and then execute, right? It's not happening at the same time. You make the plan first. This is why every writing teacher that you've had during school made you create an outline of what you were going to write about. Our brains full on glitch when we try to outline and write at the same time. It just gets overwhelmed and doesn't know what to do. And it's really hard to see the steps that need to be taken to do what you're wanting to do. So the bonus tip is when you're at the beginning of something and you're feeling overwhelmed, tell yourself, all I have to do is make a plan. The plan doesn't have to be perfect, and I don't have to do the steps or execute the plan at all. I'm just making the plan. Then once you've made the plan, your brain just has to follow the plan, right? You've already given it the blueprints. Making any necessary adjustments along the way, that's just two things you have to do. Make a plan, follow the plan. Okay, in summary, moving past overwhelm, you want to, 1, identify the thoughts or thought that is creating that feeling of overwhelm. 2, come up with a list prior to your overwhelm. Come up with a list of thoughts that you can combat or counter the overwhelming producing thoughts. Okay? And then as a bonus tip, to start with a plan. Just start with a plan. That's all you have to do. One step. I just need a plan, and then I can rely on my brain to follow, to execute that plan. Remind yourself you don't have to do anything else. First, make a plan. Oh, my beautiful friends, this is what I have for you this week. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard and want to learn more, head over to ivfthiscoaching.com. That's www.ivfthiscoaching.com.